Yeah, one of the first questions that is brought up here is like, what's wrong with deception if it works, and why seek the truth? So everybody, perceives the truth, but what is the point if it works? What we're doing, right? Like, what is it? What is this earning for the truth when what we do works?
Hmm. Yeah.
Um,
I'll pull up some of the things I wrote.
sure.
So, where is it? Here it is. There we go. I thought that we could discuss the metaphor. Like, he says, what if, supposing truth is a woman, what then? Comparing truth essentially to a woman who must be seduced in order that you get to know her, that
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I thought, you know, obviously it's an interesting sort of statement that a lot has been made of, and I thought,
Yeah.
what is it to seduce truth? Because at first glance, it sort of seems like he's saying that truth is something that a sort of ideal that you can that you have to uncover, which sort of seems like very in opposition to other things he said before.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you go down, when you go down a couple paragraphs, like three paragraphs lower, he's
One of the
he
things
equates.
one of the things I want to point out though is like I guess what he's kind of trying to say is a lot of philosophers have been like ham-fisted with the truth, they're not really finessing the idea of what truth really is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I was getting to that though. So because when he posits truth as something, comparing it to a woman that needs to be seduced, it's sort of it's almost like that ham-fisted idea of truth, like a platonic sort of idea of truth. But if you go to a few paragraphs lower, he equates truth with perspective, so he writes about Plato's gravest error, which was the pure spirit and the good as such. And then he writes, to be sure, it meant standing truth on her head and denying perspective, the basic condition of all life, when one spoke of spirit and the good as Plato did. Because, I think obviously one of the biggest themes you could say in Nietzsche is that there's no truth, for everyone. Like uh, just no ideal of truth that everyone can sort of say is the truth. And
Mm-hmm.
so if there's no one truth, then truth is just equated with perspective. So whatever, um, yeah, it's taking into account the perspectival uh, element in experience. So
It's
Yeah.
like what is truth in a world of appearance?
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Can I chime in? Can you guys hear me? Is my audio
Yeah.
quality all
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Pretty
Um,
good.
I'm thinking about this a lot. I thought about this specifically a lot when I was learning about the Revolutionary War with America. There's people often tend to look back at history and prominent historical figures with rose-tinted goggles of nostalgia. Um, but in reality, we need to acknowledge that these people were really very flawed and very human. But in reality, the truth isn't a sexy concept for inspiration. We like to prefer to look at heroes with falsified visions of who they really are. And because humans are a blend of the irrational and rational, and philosophers can hit a wall by seeking pure rationality because it's not always super effective to be hyper rational because we aren't bred for that necessarily. We
Mm.
need we need lies, but ones that are benevolent in how they are consequential to our lives. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think it's part of
Is
what
that
he
is
gets
that is that too
into as
tangent?
well.
Is that too tangent
Yeah.
than what
Yeah, I mean
I didn't
that's
redo the
kind of what
reading?
Nietzsche's getting at. That is kind of what Nietzsche gets at.
I think I think in the long like time span of our species, it is ideal to me to be working towards truth as we in my view, the human form is a very temporary one among future ones we in consciousness will take. And I think, in the long time span of thousands of years, it'll be helpful that we approach what the truth may actually be. But we are humans having a human experience in this moment, so we kind of have to acknowledge that sometimes we believe irrationally, and that's okay. And we can't be these hyper pure irrational rational things. We have to like blend in the poetry with the science, and that'll be a key to fulfillment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, it's part of what he's bringing into the fore here, which is that as Viserys sort of brought up, it's been taken for granted that truth is this ideal that we ought to strive towards, and it's part of the really interesting reframing by Nietzsche is that what really is the value of this, it's just, again, it's been taken for granted that this is an ideal that everyone ought to pursue, but really what value is it? Just not to say that it's not of any value, but at least to pose the question,
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things that really stuck out at me, and I've it's been a long time since I read the rest of this book. I've only read this chapter in the preface for this meeting. Is that although he says he's going to question the value of truth, he never actually says he doesn't value truth. He never. No. The only place where he even comes close to that is when he talks about synthetic a priori judgments and how they're false but necessary because they're how we put structure on the world.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And some other parts of maybe this book or other books, he's talking about, how hardcore he is with the truth. You know what I mean? Like, truth is a big deal to Nietzsche. It's just how you utilize it, whether it's, or how you talk about it, whether you're deceiving yourself or whether you're being true with it is really what he's getting at. And kind of what Osman was getting at too. Like, you got to find that harmony between like, this truth is actually supportive of life. So we should, or this falsification of life is still supportive of life.
Yes.
And, hey, we can run with it for a time. And if it serves us, well, then so be it.
To piggyback off what you're saying directly, I think a very good example is the birth. So film is very taken for granted of, but film only emerged in the last 100 years as an art form, including animation and visual storytelling. And it's evolved quite a bit from silent movies to permeate every bit of our lives. And I think I like to imagine, like, what if a higher intelligence was like analyzing our evolution culturally, technologically? They would view us watching movies as like, oh, this is a person watching people like lying and pretending to reenact a scenario that never actually happened. That's what it truly is at the end of the day. But for us having a human experience, what is a film and actors acting in a scenario that never happened? It's a way to, it's a lie or a falsity that can inspire us to make things real, if that makes sense. Like, how else can you make something real without lies?
That's actually an interesting way of looking at it.
There's a great quote. There's some really dumb British TV show. This may not be dumb, I'm just saying that word, but there's a woman going along with the Grim Reaper across time and space, learning like lessons on philosophy. And the Grim Reaper tries to explain to her that none of these things are real, like truth and harmony and poetry and love, and it's not real. But humans make it real by believing in lies, and that's what helps us navigate life. Is things that aren't true inspiring us to make things that are real after being inspired by the fact.
Yeah. It gets like Mark was bringing up. He never goes for that completely nihilistic idea that any idea of truth or any idea of truth is worthless, or that any perspective is as good as any other. But he always he always sort of fudges the borders between truth and untruth in a really interesting way. Like like part of truth is to, just to give an example, that part of truth is to take into consideration the untruth of every perspective, like, because any perspective that's mine or yours or anyone else's is perfectly true for the person that's experiencing it, no matter how it rings to another person. So, when he equates truth with perspective, that's kind of what he's doing, is fudging the borders between what's true and what's not true, without ever throwing away like the concept entirely. And I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I agree with that statement. Um, I'm learning to like animate now. The example I posted in film is pretty shitty, but I do have some complex animations I've been making. And like if you blow up what I'm making in the 3D imager, it's all a bunch of like 2D images that are incomplete, and it's like tricks of the lens to make it look more realistic. So to me, the true form of what I'm animating is not cool looking, but in boiling it down in an untruthful perspective of it, it can be more inspiring what I'm trying to get across in terms of messages. So what I'm trying to say here is that perspective, I agree with you, is very important, because perspective is what channels the poetry or the harmony of a greater whole into a more refined content of what it represents.
This is tangential, but it's not from Nietzsche, but it reminds me of Zizek saying that untruth, like in cinema or theater or poetry, is sometimes more truthful than anything that you could experience in real life, which is a really beautiful idea to me. Like you can watch a movie and it can express, even though it's a fiction, it can express something that's rings very authentically true. I think it's kind of what you're saying.
Yes, exactly that. Yes, it's kind of like dancing is it's like it's movement, but it's boiled down to the most rhythmic, harmonious movements of all movement. As you could say, like a lot of movies that you and I share an interest in, they aren't like super accurate to how reality unfolds, but it's like boiling down the most rhythmic and harmonious instances of those moments into one concentrated form. And that allows us to really take in and understand a deeper complexity, even though it might not be really real. Like our actors really act like, actors in the Shakespearean play are not really their characters, but this is what it's doing at the end of the day.
Yeah, fantastic. Absolutely agree.
And one of the points relating to what you said, Crocs, is that it's not. He mentions in the Aphorism 10 here how it's not quite nihilism of like anything goes and nothing matters, because it's more that it's uncertain. There's multitude of perspectives, and it's not the same as there is nothing.
Yeah, because it goes back to what I was saying, that your perspective of the world is perfectly true for you. And he actually has a passage in the unpublished fragments saying something like, appearance is the single reality of all things. Because it comes back to this idea that he talks about in the preface of Plato's invention of the pure spirit, which is, for Nietzsche, you fall into error when you abstract from all the perspective to isolate something that's true for all perspectives together. Like that's when you fall into idealism for Nietzsche. But it's not that, like he writes in Genealogy of Morals in the third essay that the idea of objectivity is just the more affects that you put in something. So the more perspective that you have on something, the greater the objectivity will be. But if we abstract from all the perspectives and conceive of a whole from all the perspective, for Nietzsche, that's where you fall into metaphysics and untruth, in a sense that he wouldn't support, I guess.
Sounds pretty good.
Yeah, and we can also
This
talk
of truth and irrational. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's good. If you want to add anything, go ahead, because I was going to shift the discussion of truth from the preface to the discussion of the good as such, which is also another very, very important notion in his philosophy, which is a criticism of Plato, which is the good as such is the same thing. It's an ideal in that you isolate or abstract from all the ideas of the good to isolate one good that's good for all, kind of thing, instead of just a plurality of actions that one may describe as being good.
Oh yeah, we can shift it there then.
What?
Oh, we can shift it there then.
Oh yeah, it's up to you guys.
Yeah, go for it.
Well,
Say that again. Can you do you mind mentioning it again? I missed a bit
yeah,
of it.
sure. I'm saying is that because he brings it up in the preface, and it's a theme that shows up again and again in his philosophy, which is the idea of an ideal of the good that's good for everyone and for eternity, kind of thing. Because for a Nietzschean pluralist kind of perspective, there is no, there are no moral facts. There's just throughout time actions that are done by people and that various people have defined, have called good. Like, and there's no agreement on throughout time and for all people in all countries what that good is. But and for Nietzsche, it's on what you would call as anti-natural to reify an ideal of the good that's good for everyone and for all time.
Yeah, well, I want to add some context here because my roommates are super duper religious. One is actually a creationist. Like extinct. But I'm like discussing Christianity with them a lot, and in doing so, I looked into the history of the Bible, and people often think like, oh, the Bible is set in stone. And, this is the book of this and the gospel of that. The Bible has been continually edited and like rewritten multiple times across the centuries, and drastic parts of the stories have been changed to fit cultural norms of that time. And if you want a very practical example of what Crox is saying, you can go back into the history of the Bible and see why certain things were edited a certain way. That was because morality at that time was different because it changes across history. There's no objective morality as humans would like to say there is in terms of good and bad. It really is as it fits the times.
And Nietzsche was a philologist before he was a philosopher. So, he mostly worked, I think, on the Greeks, but he would have been really very aware of and reading all about the battles that were taking place in 19th century philology about that very question at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I do wonder. I don't know. I think it's very. I love Nietzsche a lot for the specific talking point because I do agree that if you blow up your perspective of life beyond your 70 or 80-year lifespan and look at the entire existence of life, starting from single cells up until you, morality does fall apart into kind of just like an evolutionary process of what maximizes reproduction or what helps make a complex organization or complex community more efficient at competing, right? So, and that changes because it really helps to be a warlord at certain points in history, and it really helps to be like a nerd in certain points of history. And if I were to critique modern right wingers, despite myself being rather conservative, they almost praise an objective good existing in right wing tradition. So, like, do you know what I'm talking about when I mentioned like that? Like certain right wingers are like
I think so.
promoting trad living.
The way I put it is the politicians have become the new priests. You see what I'm saying? Because they're
a little bit.
They're kind of out there projecting their own little left-right dogma or whatever. Like, oh, vote for us, this that. Because that's
I would say it's also kind of like trad living. Like the man has to be the breadwinner, the woman has to be the stay-at-home mom who wears a sundress and has runs the wheat fields with bare feet, and we make butter at the house. Like it's like almost a hyper obsession or hyper idealization of the past. But the reality is these things are always evolving, just like the human form is also temporary. So is our moral systems.
Yeah, I have a few things to say here, and I also want to link what you've been saying, Ozzy, with one little piece of comment that was left by Air Griffinheit yesterday on the channel. He said something about how the ideal man, like the concept of man, is, I can't remember exactly the wordage he used, but he said it was a principle of breeding. And we can apply the same thing here with the idea of the good and what you were saying about the evolving notion of the good throughout history and their reworking of the Bible in that fashion. So anytime, so the reworking of the Bible would have been done by, the powers that be, so to speak, like the people in power. And those who define the notion of the good are molding their societies in such a way that the people who live up to this ideal of the good are, the man as such, like the good citizen, and whoever is not living up to this ideal of the good is sort of a sinner against the ideal. So in that way, you can fashion a community around your ideal of what is good, and then whatever is not respecting that ideal of the good is like an outsider to it. So like whether it's a criminal or whoever doesn't essentially respect the norms of how you've built your ideal of goodness in that society. And it's the same thing. So reworking the Bible would just be one more tool for that. So one more tool to that end as a principle of breeding.
Yes. It's a very weird topic to approach normies about because I think we're at a crossroads of history in all aspects of our existence, and I think even more morality. I wouldn't say like, oh, it's all up for grabs because morality is subjective, therefore anything can be permissible. I do think there's a basis that you can build upon morality to some extent. Like I was saying, the way I view morality is that it's almost like a psychologically evolved phenomenon. In the same way that you feel hunger or sexual arousal, you will feel guilt and shame and happiness based on the actions and lifestyles you choose. And I think we've evolved to react to certain stimuli, which at a larger scale favor your civilization being competitive. So, like I would say with Asians and like I would say Asia and Europe. Um,
You're getting cut off a little bit, Ozzy.
Yeah, we can't hear you anymore.
oh,
Okay, so um,
I was being too based, and the powers that be tried to kill me. I do think like when we look at like why certain people feel shame or guilt or even happiness for certain acts or lifestyles, we have to analyze that. Like why does someone evolve to feel guilt over this action? Is it cultural or does it have a biological relevance to our existence? And I do think that might play a role in like helping us guide morality in terms of being useful, not just doing whatever the fuck we want.
All right, well, we're about 30 minutes in, and we ain't even on number one yet.
Yeah, let's focus back on the aphorisms as much as we can.
Yeah.
Not go too far. But to the point that we were all talking, Crocs, as you mentioned, like morality, Nietzsche kind of defines here, like morals should be understood as the doctrine of relations of supremacy under the phenomena of life comes to be. So it's kind of like that's what morality is in terms of it's a reflection of the beliefs or the values of the hierarchy or the people who are in control, kind
Sure.
of saying what life should be, which is yeah. But yeah, let's go back to because I want to make sure we cover the aphorisms.
Yeah.
Make sure we talk about it. And people who don't want to use the voice, that's fine. Just either in the chat for
Not fine.
general, feel free to post your questions or comments as we go through.
Yeah, you will be graded on participation.
All right. Well, by that token, we sort of already talked about. We only tackled the preface, but aphorism 1 is about the will to truth. So we sort of tackled that already. If we want to get through it, maybe we can just skip that one.
Aphorism 2 kind of talks about, as you were saying about, there are multiple possibilities, and rather than one perspective on a matter, and he talks about the dangerous maybe. the philosophers of the dangers maybe bottom here. So it's more seeing things from different perspectives and not saying that there is one way to think about something. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'd like to make a suggestion. As part of prepping for this meeting, I read through well, I didn't actually finish it, but I started reading a book of interpretation called Nietzsche's Task by Lawrence Lampert, which is a chapter by chapter analysis of Beyond Good and Evil. And he groups the sections in chapter 1 into a couple of different blocks, and one of which is 2 through 6, and where he sort of sees this collection of blocks of parts as trying to fundamentally establish that philosophy is not really about will to truth, but about will to order and control the world.
Will to power.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's all will to power.
Yeah.
I did think there were a couple of really interesting bits where he does talk about a will to truth at one point. Something like, among scholars who are really scientific men, there you may really find something like a drive for knowledge.
Yeah.
And I found very entertaining the fact that when he was giving examples of scholars as, an expert on fungi or a chemist or a philologist, which suggests that this is something he was applying to himself as well. But that, I mean, he's implicitly at least asking us to see him in the same light. That that regardless of whether or not what he is doing is also about seeking truth, it is also about imposing a certain ordering on the world, a certain perspectival superset or some such.
Yeah, I have a few ideas on this. So I think he details elsewhere in the book. So I'm not going to go too much in depth because it'll be for another book club. But he makes a distinction between what he calls philosophers and philosophical laborers. So philosophical laborers are more like what you're talking about. So the scholars, the scientific men. So I think he sort of viewed himself in that light. And as you're saying, he's sort of equating himself with those people as a philologist. But he sort of moved on from that phase when he decided to tackle philosophy because scholars are into it's like a craft, it's like a trade almost. That's how he views it. It's the accumulation of petty facts is what he calls it. So, whereas when you jump over into philosophy, it's more about a creation of a worldview kind of thing. So a manner of interpreting the world, which then qualifies our being in the world. So the way that we interact in the world, our experience of the world.
So I'm not disagreeing with you. Sorry. I do want to just throw out there that I don't know why he says this, because if he gives a justification, he hasn't gotten to it yet. But Lampert actually suggests that Beyond Good and Evil is aimed more at those scholars and philosophical laborers than it is at philosophers.
Lampert says that, so the person who wrote that book you're referencing?
Yeah, which, like I said, I don't know if that's his interpretation. I can't defend it because he hasn't explained where he gets that from yet.
Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting.
I want to build upon what Crocs and what Mark are saying.
What does this have to do with the antithesis of values and how metaphysicians view the world? Is my question. Because that's the topic of number 2, right?
Yeah. So if you want, we can, because I think what he brings up, because I had some notes about that, but yeah, it's definitely a later aphorism about types, the scholars and that kind of thing. So yeah, sure, we can. We can.
You want to go in order, or in terms of relevance of the discussion?
What'd you say, Ozzy?
Do you want to go through the aphorisms one by one in chronological order, or do you want to go in terms of how they're relevant to a flowing discussion? How do you want to go through that?
That's kind of what a book reading is, you read through the.
Yeah. I think Ozzy, before we try to do it like that, but now I think it'd be a good idea to sort of try to stick to the aphorisms to really sort of try to carve out the value that we can find in it, because otherwise we sort of get so in the weeds before that
Well, yeah,
it
that
got
works for me.
me a
Yeah,
little
It's
tired.
just
yeah.
about people wanting to talk
That
about
sounds
shit, like because they like hearing themselves talk. At that point, really.
no. That sounds good to me, Cross. Yeah, that sounds good. So I'll just chill.
All right. So yeah, we can tackle aphorism too, because I wrote quite extensively on almost all the aphorisms. Um, so in the next aphorism, Nietzsche continues his assault on metaphysics and Platonic idealism by tackling the thing in itself. Because so idealism essentially views phenomena as being grounded in a transcendent reality, so that things have an existence unto themselves beyond, our experience of them, our perspective of the world, and that's an unchanging sort of static reality beyond the way that we experience the world. And so it's part of the metaphysician's manner of doing philosophy, or yeah, of carving out the world, to have these things that exist no matter whether we have an experience of them, and to exist in that way and forever. So you know so how could anything originate out of its opposite? So this means that things have their opposites, so like a good and an evil, as we spoke of briefly earlier,
Well,
have.
first, let's just look at the aphorism, okay? Like, hold on.
Yeah,
We
that's
should just
kind of
look at
what
the
I'm
aphorism
doing.
because, like, I know, but from the very beginning of the aphorism, we can see that what you were just talking about is in quotes. You know what I'm saying? Like, so
Yeah,
that whole part that's in quotes, he's pretending he's a metaphysician and he's talking against himself as a metaphysician would talk against him. Like, oh, how could anything
sure.
arise out of its opposite? Like as if he was a metaphysician talking against himself. You know what I mean? So, because Nietzsche
That's
believes that things arise out of their opposite.
that's how I took it as well.
Interesting point.
It depends. I mean, what do you mean by that? Because yeah, just please expand on what you mean by that.
We can see at the very second half what he means.
If you look at my the what I'm sharing, you can see the quotes if you don't have it open.
Do you mean the second half of the
The first
passage you
paragraph.
quote? Yeah, the first paragraph. Yeah. Okay.
It's just in quotes, so he's implying that Nietzsche is not necessarily believing in that, but he's kind of speaking from the perspective of a metaphysician, I guess, of saying like the first sentence, like how could anything originate out of his opposite? It's almost like how could that be? And it's like Nietzsche kind of knows or believes that's the case, but he's arguing from the opposite end.
Yeah, because you can see at the let's see, at the end of the quotes, judgments of this kind constitute the typical prejudice by which we can always recognize the metaphysicians of every age. This kind of value judgment is at the back of all of their logical proceedings. From out of this belief of theirs, they go about seeking their knowledge, which they end up by ceremoniously dubbing quote unquote the truth. The metaphysician's fundamental belief is the belief in the opposition of values, not in that things arise out of their opposite, but that things exist in an antithesis of values like good and evil, and they exist in
Mm-hmm.
this static state of, the platonic good, the platonic evil, or whatever. You know what I mean? But at the very end of it, that dangerous perhaps we can see. Sorry, I had to scroll down because my push to talk is control. But we can see that the dangerous perhaps is that it could be even possible that whatever constitutes the values of these two of the good and the bad is identical with that. So what is whatever constitutes the value? That's the human that constitutes the value of the good and the bad, and that they're inextricably intertwined with and fundamentally one and the same as that valuation of the good and the bad. It's because it comes from within themselves. You see what I'm saying?
I have a question. What is meant by the foreground valuation, and again by the frog perspective?
Oh, that's where was that mentioned? Is that in the preface?
No, that's
Oh,
in
wait,
number two.
it's right here. It's right here. Yeah.
Yes. What is the meaning of that foreground valuation?
I think I'm not sure about the foreground estimates, but I think
He's saying that it's a shallow evaluation of, of what the antithesis of values is, a shallow valuation. It's like a view from a corner or something, and you're looking at something in the center of the room from like your peripheral, or maybe you're down at some weird angle like a frog and you're looking up, or you know what I mean? Like,
Is it
because
what?
well,
Is it
what he's
what?
saying is it's just an odd perspective. Like like at the point in time, like painters were painting utilizing the frog like a perspective or whatever. It was like a popular thing to do. And so they would imagine what that would be like, but it's from this odd perspective of what it would be, not from the human's perspective.
Are you sure that's what's going on there? If it's a frog perspective, there's that aphorism later in the first book where he talks about the three perspectives, like the river Ganga and like a frog, and I don't remember what the middle one is there.
The
But there is
Gangastro
yes,
yeah.
that's right. So there is. My understanding was that when you view things from the bottom, like a frog, the heavens seem so far away from you that you will consider them in some way transcendent or belonging to some different realm. Whereas when you are, I think it is here, when you are a bird of prey and you look down upon it, it does not seem, you don't posit a sort of a separate realm, like a transcendent, something like that.
That's
Would you
that's
agree with
sort of
that?
what Viserys was saying, though.
Yeah.
Wasn't it Viserys? Like the
Yeah,
frog
you're looking at
perspective
it
is the
from
perspective
this,
from below, like the
yeah,
perspective
this,
that's fudging the state of affairs. And as you're
Is
saying, Gore, is like you may perceive it as being transcendent. So the metaphysician's perspective is the frog's perspective that sees it from below. And so for
yes,
him, those valuations they come from they seem to come, as he says earlier, from the lap of being, so from a transcendent position.
yes, but I think that's important that when you view things from below, you consider the things that are above to be somehow separate because they're so far away. It's not simply sort of below and above, but this is a mistake that happens when you do view things from below as a frog would. At least that's how I read it.
Oh, sure,
This is the
it's
cause of the
definitely
mistake.
important. Yeah.
It's the cause of the mistake. So the cause of the mistake being the metaphysician's mistake of thinking that there are two orders, not simply one order. And the cause of that mistake is that, the philosophers, they really haven't been worth their material, not worthy of their material. They view things from below. And as a creature that views things from below, it will sort of posit these things which are above as somehow being of a different order. Anyhow,
they're not necessarily opposites, they're the same thing, but it's just because our limitations in perspective, we might see it as separate.
well, it's not a natural or an inevitable limitation of perspective. It's just these philosophers have not been worthy of the undertaking, that they put before them. Anyhow.
Yeah. So we're at the second to last paragraph here, and I think to conclude, it's really it's an undoing of binary opposites for one. So the metaphysicians view values as existing, as you were saying earlier, Viserys, on a binary. So the good and the evil, and they're sort of static and always there, separate from perspective, from perspective, and
Right,
they are
and that there isn't
transcendent.
any of this growth from something out of its
Mhm.
opposite, or any of this, like, like from, just say, like Birth of Tragedy 3, when he talks about how the Greeks came out of nature to, they were suffering under the titanic forces of nature. Then they created the Apollonian forms, and their architecture started withstanding the titans of nature, and they could, they developed a sort of security for themselves and all that shit. You know what I mean? Like, they
Sure.
grew out of their opposite from this Dionysian thing in nature to these more individuated people that have organized systems that have conquered the titans of nature.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's a recurrent theme in Nietzsche. It's related to the pathos of distance. That you require distance from another thing to qualify yourself
Absolutely,
as a certain
absolutely.
thing.
And that's part of absolutely, like, that whole you're the good and the bad, the valuation or whatever, like you're the thing that intertwines, and whatever or whatever constitutes the value of those two things is you, the human being, or whatever. I forget what I was gonna say, but I got
Yeah, I get
lost in
you.
trying to explain that bullshit. Um, but I mean, that's the dangerous, perhaps, is what he's saying. Is like, yo, we are, like, we got to accept that we're all of that. Like, we can't try to pretend like we can extirpate out certain things of our nature. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, yeah. So it's what idealism does, is by positing an ideal of the good, and the bad is external to, is tied to, but external to the good, and it's something that that is to be, like you said, extirpated. So the bad side of the binary opposite is always to be extirpated. But as we'll see on the very last aphorism of chapter 1, it's like you can't take one without the other, kind of thing. And if one is required for the furtherance of life, then the other will be as well. And which is what, in Nietzsche's judgment, is something that a lot of people don't want to accept.
True. Which is why I brought it up, because it's pretty important.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. We can move, I guess, to the third one now.
For sure. We killed number 2.
Killed it.
Well, I guess here it's a bit of a continuation of these seemingly static binary opposites. So he brings up being conscious as the opposite of being unconscious. So, well, what's conscious and what's unconscious? So we can tackle that. It's a pretty short aphorism. I guess I can start
This is
us.
a topic I like. This is a topic I like. Sorry, I'm off my break now. But one of Elon Musk's talking points he always yammers on about is consciousness. And, like, what is it? Well, we don't really know. But then he offers this kind of question that I think is a good example of this, in that we know that after the Big Bang happened, he went to, like, random subatomic particles flying around, and then from that chaos, you eventually get more organized structures, like, atoms form, then molecules, then you have.
You're really breaking up again, dude. You can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, hold
Um, all right. I don't know if you'll go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was saying, like, we know that from the first moment of time, we had, crazy particles everywhere, and they slowly became ordered into, protons, neutrons from quarks, which became atoms, which became chemistry, which became biology, which became, sentient life at some point. So he asks, at what point between the atom and us do we have sentience emerge or consciousness emerge? I think that is kind of like a question of, okay, on the spectrum of this timeline, when does it happen? Is it like a finite point or is it a gradient point? And what does that mean? Does that make sense?
I guess so. I just don't know where it's coming from.
Well, I like the consciousness. As we're talking about consciousness versus unconsciousness, and I'm wondering, the question becomes: is consciousness like a light bulb you turn on and off in our evolution, or is it kind of like a gradient emergent thing that continues to get more luminous, like a light getting brighter?
Right.
I think that's a legitimate question, but I'm not sure that's what Nietzsche's getting at in part
Yeah,
three.
it's kind of very unrelated to the book. I think that's really.
Oh, okay. My bad.
No, it's okay, man. It's just to really to hammer that again. Before, when we've done book clubs, we've never been able to stick to the book, and it's gotten to the point where I was quite frustrated with it. So I'd really like for us to try, because as Viserys was saying earlier, it's kind of the point of a book reading is that you're kind of trying to understand the book you're reading, and if we're just go on tangents like that, we're gonna
and Elon Musk
eventually,
with
like,
Nietzsche
hammer the
is just
same.
like
Yeah.
don't even bring up Elon with Nietzsche. Elon doesn't know shit with Nietzsche, though he may bring up some good points on consciousness or whatever.
Yeah.
But you know what I
But,
mean.
but
I
it's
just
like,
don't.
Oh, I misinterpreted the aphorism you're talking about then. Okay, continue.
no, it's all good. It's all good. But just to last word on that, like before we've covered like 6-7 books of Nietzsche, but all our book club meetings we ended up talking about the same things every time. Like it was kind of frustrating. So yeah, we can keep going. It's nothing against you, Ozzy. Like, I love you. So it's nothing like nothing against you.
And we can always have separate VCs that are not
Sure.
starting the book reading.
Absolutely.
So back to this aphorism 3. It's interesting how he talks about, people generally think of being conscious as being opposite of what's instinctive. And he mentions how, like, it's not the opposite because the conscious thinking is guided in a way by instincts. Our instincts are at the bottom of it, kind of making us think certain ways, which is
Right,
which
it's
is
like leveled,
yeah,
layered.
yeah, and it's really cool because even in science, when they do the research, they support this idea of, like, before you even come up with an decision, your decision's already made in the brain before you are conscious of it. So it's almost like kind of supporting this idea that you already make your decisions, and being conscious of that decision is just isn't isn't an opposite. It's just flowing from it rather.
Yeah, he says being conscious is not in any decisive sense the opposite of what is instinctive. Most of the conscious thinking of a philosopher is secretly guided and forced into certain channels by his instincts. So yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
exactly.
saw this as basically continuing to develop the line in the from part 2 that philosophers are fundamentally not truth seekers, but are rather trying to build a world to justify whatever their own prejudices tell them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that theme runs throughout a lot of the first chapter at least.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, talking about those foreground evaluations again, towards the end of it.
It's a
He goes.
continuation also. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, he talks about the idea of, like, underneath all this, like, truth seeking, is the other drives. I think it's aphorism 6. So, like you said, Crocs, like, it's the underlying same ideas he's gonna explore further into these writings.
Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting that he continues to undo binary opposites. So being conscious, being opposite of, consciousness and instincts, not truly being opposites in the end. And then if we move to the second paragraph, behind all logic and its seeming sovereignty of movement, two, there stand valuations or more clearly physiological demands for the preservation of a certain type of life. That goes also back to what we were talking about earlier in the preface, and something that Eric Griffin Hyde had brought up, which is that the ideal of the good is a breeding a breeding principle. So here, with logic, there are always valuations behind our concepts. So they don't arise out of like pure, unadulterated contemplation or rationalizing. They're always like our morality or our values are always at the bottom of this logic of our rationalizing things. So here in this case, logic seems to be sovereign. It seems to have a movement, a way of developing that is sovereign. But really, behind it, there are valuations. There are demands, like physiological demands for a certain type of human being or for a certain way of life that's behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Is the I'll go from more asking questions, I guess, is a better approach for me, I think, towards this. So I would say, in this text, is he kind of saying that we can be built in or be born with built-in biases that we can't really fight, which would be distinct from cultural biases in terms of this perspective?
Well, I
Not
would say,
exactly. He gets to that kind of later with the strong and weak wills versus the free and unfree will.
Mm-hmm.
Like he says, get rid of the notions of free and unfree will, because that's an abuse of cause and effect. But it's more like strong and weak wills. But that's later on, like I think like 19 or something like that, maybe 21. I can't remember.
Okay, would be good with aphorism 3 or anything else to share about
I'm reading it,
3?
but I don't think I have anything else to say about it.
I have a question. So
Sure.
it was interesting to me that he doesn't seem to be denying that there is something like the truth. He seems to be saying simply that the path there is not as secure, not as pure as it may appear to philosophers. In this, I found this statement quite strange. The definite is worth more than the indefinite. For instance, perhaps the definite is worth more than the indefinite, or appearance worth less than truth. I wasn't sure what to make of the, at least in this translation, the truth is in quotes. And so I wasn't sure what to make of that. But there is no, this statement that appearance, the definite is worth more than the indefinite, or appearance worth less than truth. I don't know how one gets behind that. I mean, it is implicit in the idea of an appearance that there is a deception.
But not
And
for Nietzsche.
surely one would say that deception is worth less than the actual thing that's happening. No, I don't agree with that. I think for Nietzsche as well. I mean, there are many ways of being deceived. Surely, if there is something about this project which is meant to clarify things for the human being, and if the point of the project is to clarify, you are getting beyond a deception towards something like the truth. And it made me wonder, this aphorism, whether because it is about motives and about the path to the goal, but it doesn't seem to deny the goal, at least not as I read it. So I found that curious. In the second aphorism, rather, he is making a distinction between these supposed two sources. But in the second aphorism, he appears to let that distinction lie and speak simply in terms of the sort of the will, the apparent piety of the philosophers, and so on and so forth. But does not question. Anyhow, does not question truth and the existence of something like truth and something like appearance.
But here,
Let's not. I mean, that's exactly what Nietzsche does, though. So let's do.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to question truths, you can see Nietzsche's opinion on truths in 231 real quick at the very end, where he discusses my truths, not mine as in mine, as in Viserys, but mine as in Nietzsche's, as in his truths. You see what I'm saying? They're his truths, not your truths, not Crocs's truths, not Dare's truths, not these truths. They're his truths. You see what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Because they're from his
No, I don't
perspective.
see what you're saying. This is a little bit being slippery with words. It strikes me.
That's what
But
Nietzsche does
I mean,
all the time. Nietzsche is slippery with words. What are you talking about? Like, you think Nietzsche
no,
posits truth? Like, there's some like
no,
dogmatic truth or something? Like, what are you doing?
no, I'm not talking about dogmatic truth. I'm talking about admitting this word in this word truth. It matters less whether it's my truth or your truth or their truth or the universal truth. But as long as something like that exists, that is something to hold on to.
Yeah, we already
Anyhow,
discussed
But
that
you're,
Nietzsche doesn't neglect or like negate the idea of truth. Like, we already said that when we were discussing the preface. I'm not sure if you were here for that, but I mean,
I was not.
oh, okay. I think Croxy brought it up.
I did, and I think I can shed at least a little bit of light for you. So here, he outright says that, for example, that the definite should be worth more than the indefinite, in mere appearance worth less than quote unquote truth, Wahrheit. And then he describes that as a certain kind of niaiserie. A niaiserie is like a foolishness. So he's outright describing this as a possibly a foolishness. So because for Nietzsche, one important thing to keep in mind is that appearance does not imply deception. He describes appearance, again, you weren't there earlier, but I brought up that passage from the Nachlas. He describes appearance as the single reality of things. So there's nothing behind appearance for
The
Nietzsche.
Greeks were
Appearance is all there is.
profound, or the Greeks were profound out of, or I'll bring up the quote, but
Out
it
of
was from
shallowness,
Gay
I think he
Science. It's from
says.
Gay Science.
Yeah, out of shallowness, I think he says.
Or the Greeks worshipped appearance out of profundity or some shit like that.
Yeah. So yeah, so to make possibly make this passage hopefully a little bit clearer, the point is that for Nietzsche, there are only appearances. There's nothing behind the appearance, and if you abstract from the plurality of appearances, meaning if you abstract from the all of our perspectives together, you're not going to get to a truth that's beyond all of these perspectives put together, because there is no such thing for Nietzsche as all the perspectives put together. That's when you fall. If you go beyond all these perspectives, it's what you would call reifying all the perspectives. You're falling into metaphysics if you do that. And for Nietzsche, that's what he's trying to avoid. So, as I was saying earlier, appearance is, my appearance, the way that the world appears to me is perfectly true for me, as is your appearance of the world for you. Yeah.
So you're basically saying that the combination of these appearances, these different perspectives, don't get you to a greater truth of.
Exactly. Yeah. You don't get so there's no what you call it in semiotics, like a reference behind the appearance. It's not
Mm.
that your appearance is entirely constructed from your mind. It's not really that. It's more that the reality behind the appearance is not like a sort of static reality that's the same whether or not you're experiencing it, kind of thing. So it's shifting, and you bring into it, it's a sort of a dialectical relationship. You bring into the appearance some of what you are. So it's not just, you're not just experiencing the appearance like unfiltered reality. You're bringing some of yourself into it. Like, just to
Yeah,
give like a very
you
simple
are what you
example.
look like, basically. Like, there's a reason
Yeah,
why you dress the way you do, you act the way you know what I mean.
sure.
There's reasons why, like, you know, something may cost money or something may be like beautiful to look at or something like you like the way it looks, whatever, you know.
But to give an example that's much more primary than this. Like, if I'm walking down the street in my neighborhood, I may not be noticing like the houses around me because I've walked in this neighborhood a lot. Another person may be walking down the neighborhood and be noticing all sorts of different things. So, in this sense, this person and I'm bringing some of myself into the appearance, my experience of the appearance of the world. And so he's calling some of this into question. That's why he puts truth, the word in German is Wahrheit, into quotation marks here. So it's, as if mere appearance is worth less than truth. Because when you say that mere appearance is worth less than truth, that you've already made a value judgment about reality, which is what he's trying to highlight here. And again, he says that, these mere foreground estimates, again, that appearance is worth less than truth, is a certain kind of niaiserie, a foolishness, a stupidity. And also to maybe conclude the aphorism here, he's saying that this foolishness, this niaiserie, is just necessary for the preservation of such beings as we are. So it's not a necessity. It's not a necessity in itself. It's just necessary for us to be able to experience the world in a certain way. Because if everyone in the world, as of right now, stopped believing that there was some sort of truth behind the appearance, the world would probably fall apart. So that's what he's highlighting here.
Okay. I'm so sorry. I think I've derailed the discussion a little bit, but allow me to
No,
ask
no,
one
it's
more
totally
question.
relevant.
So
It's absolutely
this
relevant.
this niaiserie is giving us is enabling us to live, right, in a certain way. It's enabling us to live, which is not nothing. That it's enabling us to live.
Yeah,
But it
absolutely.
seems that because by calling something a foolishness, you are proposing that there is something better. Isn't that that better living in the light of the truth? I mean, isn't the niaiserie precisely because of the illusion? Aren't you lying to yourself in this niaiserie? And isn't the goal then here and
Yeah,
that you
and
live
that's why I
without
was like,
foolishness, that
that's
you
why
live
I was
without this
saying,
foolishness, and therefore in the light of what actually is or how things actually are?
But you're only lying
yeah,
to yourself though if there
that's why I
is
was
a truth
saying
behind the
Nietzsche is
appearance.
so hardcore on the truth and integrity, especially with his truths, like he doesn't, people are like, oh, he contradicts himself. Well, no, he really doesn't. There's nuance to all of his thoughts that don't contradict, you know what I mean? Like,
I
they're
think we can actually bring this to the next aphorism because it's entirely related to what we're discussing right now. Like the first line of that aphorism is the falseness of a judgment is for us not necessarily an objection to a judgment. In this respect,
right.
our new language may sound strangest. So it may sound strangest, like for you, Gore, saying like it sounds strange to you. So like he's perfectly aware that this is very, very strange and not something that most people would be ready to accept. Um, yeah. And then he writes, the question is to what extent it is life promoting, life preserving, species preserving, perhaps even species cultivating. So the falseness of a judgment is of secondary importance here. What's really important is our Dasein, right? Our being in the world, the manner that we interact with our world. So whether it leads to the highest happiness, as he writes somewhere else. That's what's really important to him. The way that we enact our world, and not whether something is ultimately, idealistically and metaphysically true.
Creators were they who created peoples and hung up faith and love over them. Thus they served a life.
There you go.
From the new idol, but he's just saying like, yo, people used to create the faith of the people because it served their life. Now it's the state that does it. But we, the people, used to create the faith that hung over the people. how it served life, whether it was a lie or truth, whatever, you know, it's just the fact that it served life. That's the faith. You know, we hung the faith over ourselves to serve life, whatever it was, truth or lie. We didn't really give a fuck as long as it served life.
Yeah, and he gives a very good example of how it serves life in the next couple of sentences, like the world, the fictions of logic, the synthetic judgments a priori, um, falsification of the world by means of numbers. Man could not live. He says that. Like, we know this
Exactly.
today more than ever. Like, if we stop believing in the fictions of logic, if you of course accept that logic and numbers and maths and physics are ultimately fictions, then the world would fall apart, because our entire existence is predicated upon the existence of the taking these things as true.
And I believe in the preface, he says, to our great benefit, in fact.
Does he? Well, I don't know if he does, but yeah, he would absolutely believe that, though. Yeah. And one thing that's ultimately important for him that you have to remember is that he's not writing for everyone. He's not saying that everyone ought to stop, taking logic and maths as being truths. Like, he's not. He doesn't believe that everyone should. He's writing for a very specific type of person here, the people who can bear that, because not everyone would be able to. Yeah, like he speaks of synthetic judgments a priori, which are often taken to be things like logical, like pure logical or formal logic statements or mathematics. The synthetic judgments a priori are not limited to logic. Like, a synthetic judgment a priori could be something like, it is wrong to murder children for fun. And it's pretty essential that the vast majority of people keep believing that it is wrong to murder children for fun is an actual synthetic judgment a priori. If
I
everyone
have a
stopped
question for
believing that, it would fall apart.
I have a question for clarification. Do you
Sure.
mean synthetic a priori? Is that kind of just mean like self-evident statement?
A synthetic judgment a priori, it comes from Immanuel Kant. It's like it's something that you don't have to have actual experience of to take us through. So that's the first condition for a synthetic judgment a priori. So you don't have to verify empirically that it is true to judge that it is true. Like 2
Eh,
+ 2 = 4 kind of thing,
It's I highlighted the part he meant judgments that are known for certain to be true independently of experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. So clearly, I have like a mental definition for that going forward. Thank you.
But yeah, so for most people, the judgment, the statement that murdering children for fun is wrong is a synthetic judgment a priori. People don't need to reflect on this. They don't need to experience it to judge that it's wrong. It just is wrong for most people, which is, it's not a bad thing. It's, even though you may concede that there are no moral facts, I don't want to live in a world where everyone just murders children for fun. So.
Mm-hmm.
So to this extent, it might be a life furthering judgment,
Mm-hmm.
Right, exactly.
So
Not
this
that
is
it's
why,
true, not that it's true, but it's a life furthering judge. You see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
yeah, it's true. It's true because we enter subjectivity or enter subjectively posit it as true. You see what I'm saying? It's like
mhm.
so many of us, it's my truth, it's your truth, it's just there's so many of us on that same truth page where it's like, okay, it seems like it's an objective a
It
priori.
kind of creates the reality around us from us
Yeah,
believing in it. Is what you're trying
exactly,
to say.
exactly.
Absolutely, yeah. And then he writes. That's why he writes. Then, to recognize untruth as a condition of life, So this sort of untruth is a condition of life. So, like you just said, Ozzy, it creates a reality around us. So it's a
Which
precondition
goes
for us
back
to live
into
in the world.
appearance and why it's, just as important as truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, renouncing false judgments would mean renouncing life and a denial of life. Just wow.
All right. I think we can move on to the next one.
I was gonna say something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
I think maybe his point was something like um, to say that we falsify things is sort of to imply that there is a way that we could not falsify things, which is to say that there's a truthful way of looking at things. So obviously we had to have false beliefs like in our evolution because we couldn't start out with omniscience, but you could argue that the goal is an increasing, you know, defalsification. Like that's what we could aim for.
Yeah, I mean, Nietzsche says like the gathering of knowledge is a worthy like endeavor. You know what I mean? So I guess you could
But I
work
think
on that
If
line
I
more.
if I may, I I read this aphorism as taking a certain stance towards the tradition and how in philosophy knowledge is gathered and accumulated. I did not take it as being a blanket or sort of a general statement about truth. It does. The person who spoke just before, two people before, I agree with that. I think it when there is I it I think I think you cannot have an objection that something is false without also uh, having somewhere the idea that something is true. And it does read to me that when he says acknowledging untruth as a condition of life, all he's saying here is that uh, uh, we don't throw it out. It was doing something. There was some work that this untruth was doing, but it doesn't say that untruth is the permanent condition. It does seem that he's saying that, granted that this untruth was doing something, there is still there may be a better condition. I think there has to be a better condition where you are, in the state of truth rather than untruth. You're not you're not in the middle of false things.
Mm-hmm.
So I can tackle this in response to Caveman and Gore. This ultimate truth that you're referring is precisely the plurality of perspectives. So the ultimate truth for Nietzsche is that there is no ultimate truth. So that's really the real truth at bottom. The untruth that he's referring to is precisely the idea that there's an ultimate truth for everybody. That's the untruth he's referring to. The actual truth is that there's a plurality of perspectives and that there is no true perspective for everyone.
Yeah, the fundamental condition of life, and not just everyone. That's life. So a tree, a cat, a dog. The fundamental condition of life is perspective.
Rox,
Yeah,
at some point, do you mind sharing that aphorism that talks about how different perspectives combined is not necessarily closer to the truth?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'll have to scour the necklace. I can do that.
Yeah, I would love to read that. Yeah, but to some of the points mentioned here, like to bring in Jung believed that, like, I guess the goal in life or whatever, from the perspective that he saw, was to make the unconscious conscious, like all these assumptions that we had to do in the beginning, or still continue to do, to make life possible. We had to do that because we couldn't be indecisive if we couldn't think of all these things and live forth from there. We had to assume a lot and rationalize things, aftermath. But then with our conscious mind, we're kind of reflecting back on why do we do these things, why do we act in such ways, and um, making it more conscious. But combining with
I think that's
Nietzsche's.
kind of what Caveman was getting at, though. Is like,
Yes,
yeah.
yeah. But combining with Nietzsche's perspective is that there is no such thing as like something that will always be true for everybody in all circumstances. It's just, I guess, yeah, it's different perspectives work for different people.
If I may, I think the things that I've said have been taken for arguing that there is ultimate truth or perfect truth or universal truth or something like that. I'm not saying that, but I do think that this idea that for Nietzsche the only truth is that there is no truth is too pat and is in some sense a sort of a nihilism. And I'll say why. I think if there is if there is
I
if
don't think
there
we're
is if
I
there
don't
is
think we're
if
actually saying that though.
if there
But
is um, if there is a man who is able to create and impose values, that becomes a truth. That becomes a truth for many people. I mean, that's a sort of it's civilizational. It's forming. Like as soon as you get down to a sort of an atomism and say, the only thing that there is that, or the only truth that there is that each of us, well, we got a perspective, and your perspective is your perspective, and my perspective is my perspective. I think this is sort of a reading down of Nietzsche. I think there is some sort of a middle ground that you can have between, having a Platonic heaven of absolute truths and having a sort of an atomism where, we all just got a perspective.
But
yeah,
the
that's
middle
why
ground is
that's
to
why
recognize.
That's
Nietzsche
my feeling about
that's
it.
why Nietzsche details the noble type as the person who can reconcile with other people. You see what I'm saying? Because it's like, it's not just that my perspective is the one true way, the one true dogma that everyone has to fucking live to. You see what I'm saying? That's not what Nietzsche's saying either.
But the
So
middle ground, to answer Gore, is to recognize untruth as a condition of life. That's the middle ground.
he's just saying let's be more truthful with the concept of truth and untruth, not let's throw out truth or let's throw out one or the other. You know what I mean? He's just saying let's be more truthful because Nietzsche, even in like if you read the preface of the Antichrist, he's talking about how truthful he is. Like he takes truth to the verge of hardness. So that right there says he advocates for truth, because he takes truth to the verge of hardness. Like, it's a difficult way to handle truth, but it's the bloody down and dirty way to handle truth, basically.
Can I ask Gore a question? I was listening to a guy talking about the history of like early science, and one nobleman was experimenting, and he was able to like deduce the creation of I think a hydrogen gas from a chemical reaction, but he was able to measure quantities and like observe something was indeed happening, but he couldn't really figure out what was going on, and as a result, almost all of his deductions were totally bonkers and like nonsensical. But everything he was doing physically was correct towards future chemistry. So in my mind, if you're talking about like a middle ground, I'm thinking like, is it possible that we can kind of work with the idea that truth is very subjective, but we can't really know at the atomized level, like you're saying, if it goes all the way down to the bedrock layer, that there is never any form of absolute truth. Like we can't really know it yet. And this deduction might be an early form of like what he was doing, making like working with what we have, but we can't really know past a certain point.
Oh, there is a passage in the Gay Science. There's an aphorism in the Gay Science where he talks about landing on that so much of what was taken for philosophy was taken for thought. Is like bobbing up and down in a boat on the sea. But with science, you find yourself on solid ground for the first time, and it's completely it's different. It's different because there is a sense that it is not simply the cycle of there is a thesis posited and then it is negated, but that you are building up something, that there is something underground beneath your feet, and you are in a way you are building up to something. I think this is true for science, that there is a feeling of a reality that you cannot touch and you will not be able to touch, but it is going in a certain direction.
Science has
And
the
that's
senses on its side, is basically what he says a little bit later, I think, even in this section. Maybe it's in section 2 of Beyond Good and Evil. But science has those sense, or the senses on its side, more or less, which makes it so grounded to us.
Yeah, I think we can move on to the aphorism 5. It's still sort of related, of course, even though these are numbered aphorisms. He very much continues threads of thought, and here he's, at least in part, attacking the prejudices of philosophers. That's the name of the chapter, but they're purporting to be disinterested when they tackle some sort of issue, some sort of problem. And that's what, right at the beginning, he says, what provokes one to look at all philosophers half suspiciously, half mockingly, is not that one discovers again and again how innocent they are, blah, 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 but that they are not honest enough in their work, although they all make a lot of virtuous noise when the problem of truthfulness is touched, even remotely. But here's the really important bit. He says, they all pose as if they had discovered and reached their real opinions through the self-development of a cold, pure, divinely unconcerned dialectic. Parenthetical statement I'm not going to read. Well, at bottom, it is an assumption, a hunch, indeed a kind of inspiration, most often a desire of the heart that has been filtered and made abstract, that they defend with reason, that they have sought after the fact. We kind of touched this a little bit earlier, but it comes back to another point later in the book about how most philosophies are an unwitting testament, like an unwitting biography of the author, which is that you're not reaching your opinions most of the time by some sort of disinterested rationalizing, but these sort of arise out of you, and you rationalize them after the fact. I kind of rambled on there. I'm sorry.
No. I mean, you kind of talked about the things that he's going to talk about later. How the Stoics basically see their own way in nature, of like this is how they. Yeah, so they kind of see the world according to their nature, I guess.
Yeah, that's very much true. So if you have a certain temperament, go ahead.
I think this is a good way to introduce, like, my perspective on Nietzsche from this talking point is it sets the stage for what the Earth is. It's kind of like a big battleground of ideologies or competitions of perspectives, because now these set the framework of what the game's rules are, being that even prominent thinkers will have various thoughts on different topics. It's the battle is now on to see, okay, who wins. And I think that's what's interesting about history blending with this perspective from Nietzsche.
Yeah, I mean, you are kind of right, because as he says, like, Spinoza kind of armors up his philosophy with all that mathematical hocus pocus, So it's like to intimidate people away from trying to disprove it as true or false. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he says, related to what Ozzy and Viserys just said, that philosophers, they're all advocates who resent that name. And for the most part, even wily spokesmen for their prejudices, which they baptize quote unquote truths. So, yeah, they sort of advocate for their own view of their own interpretation of the world. And it's sort of a battleground, as Ozzy said. And
I have a better word for what I said. Sorry, I should use the word like competition of wills, I guess.
Well, yeah, it's an appropriate word here because this is related to the will to power. Because the will to power, according to Nietzsche, it interprets, and so it's like a bunch of interpretation, sort of fighting each other.
Interesting.
But every one of them, every one of these philosophers don't want to pretend that, they're just advocates for their own truths. They want to pretend that they're, the spokesman of the truth itself.
Right, exactly. They want to
Capital
be
T.
the thing and itself, basically, and
Yeah.
the spokesperson for the thing in itself.
But to be clear, I mean, this is, the movement of philosophy from one thinker to the next, is that there is some problem with the logic or some problem with the assumptions, something that the person has not seen, and so on. I mean, that is the movement of philosophy. It seems that there is a different challenge here at work, strangely, because it sounds like this. They are pretending. They are sort of like a black bear. It jumps up and pretends like it's a massive thing when it feels threatened. That philosophers are sort of pretending that my logic is so pure, but it's not. It's not that way. They in a very detailed way propose their point, and they argue for it. They don't simply, make a claim that my logic is pure and this is what my pure logic says. They argue the point in detail. They argue the point. It seems that Nietzsche is saying that he doesn't think that these arguments mean anything. I'm not saying he's wrong, but it seems that that's what he's saying, which is strange. It's not. He's not challenging them on their native ground of. Here was the problem in the argument that
That's
you
right.
proposed. He's simply saying that logic, one thing following from another, doesn't mean anything. And that's strange to me. I mean, it sort of dismantles so much of philosophy.
That's a fair criticism, I think. Yeah.
But Gore, you've hit the nail on the head when you said that he doesn't battle them on their own terms, and it follows from this aphorism, but it's also a thread throughout all of Nietzsche's methodology, which is that he's not going to argue, Kant on Kant's own rules of the conversation. He'll discuss, well, not whether the categorical imperative is true, but more what kind of person would come up with the idea of a categorical imperative, sort of thing.
I may have an answer for Gore. I think it depends on the person. So for everyday life, yes, it is important that we have the ability to address logic of different conversations and kind of meet in the middle of perspectives and figure out what the accurate perspective is between two of them. But at the grand competition of wills, like between warlords of ancient Greece and Rome and the Mongol horde, it's more relevant to that they don't really have to justify anything. They just kind of they don't meet people at their own terms. They just impose what they think upon the world, and that's like a big competition in various ways, not just war, but at the highest level of performance and sway and influence globally. That's kind of what makes up history, is who wins, not that dialectical battle, but that battle of just imposing yourself. Does that make sense?
Well, it might be
I
true
understand what
for
you're saying.
it might be true for warlords and businessmen and who knows what else, but it's not true for philosophers. This notion that when I go from premise to the consequent of that premise, that nothing is actually happening there. Nothing is, because I think that's what Nietzsche has to be saying, that when you go from a premise to its consequence, you think that you are doing a logical operation, but there's nothing that's happening there. You are, in fact, every moment of your argument is motivated by a value rather than a consequence of the premise. Now, and that's
He gets
interesting.
into
I
this
mean,
in Twilight of Idols and the sections Reason and Philosophy, and also one other one. I can't remember what it's called, but he discusses this in further detail.
yes, and it may be that
Causes of error, or whatever, or the four great
it may be that
errors, or whatever.
the problem is that it's simply done on logic rather than actually seeing something. Sort of, it's done on the level of logic than let's say a phenomenological level. It's not that you're seeing something and then deepening your view of it. But if the procedure is simply logical, I don't. I mean, it seems like such a profound challenge, and I don't really understand how this. Anyway, sorry. I'll stop there. But yeah.
All right.
Well, I wanted to say you are right. He does get into that, but if you want to delve deeper into that, Twilight of Idols is your friend there.
Yes. Thank you.
Is it fair to say there's one
Agree.
blending of we're talking about rationality and irrationality earlier? Is it? I think you can say that when debating things in philosophy and getting evolving and learning from your opponents, there's a mixture of both worlds: learning from them and approaching their logic genuinely, but also imposing your will and not always meeting them in the middle. Like a common example would be, could you, using Ben Shapiro facts and logic, convince a communist to stop being communist? Probably not. Does
Well,
that make
against
sense?
that, I would put the frequent Socratic argument, the Platonic Socratic argument that he will follow the argument where it goes, and if he is going to be disproven, he is as happy as anything to be disproven in the thing that he was going to say. But the thing is the conversation, is the thing that's being sought, rather than my will to impose. I mean, you have to sort of I see we're in a book that's not giving any quarter to the goodwill of philosophers, but that's that's sort of table stakes for philosophy, and that you follow in common the thing that you are talking about where it goes, um, rather than put yourself first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what Nietzsche is not interested in doing. All right. Well, I guess we can move on to the next one. But the next one is quite, at least at the beginning, it's quite related to what we're talking about. So gradually, it has become clear to me with what every great philosophy so far has been, namely the personal confession of its author in a kind of involuntary and unconscious memoir. But the more interesting bit, though, comes later, which is when he talks about how what we philosophize is not ultimately, is not a person's rational mind, but the various drives that compose a person. So, and whichever drives are strongest in a person, those are the drives that are philosophizing in that moment. So, because for Nietzsche, a person's temperament is designated or conditioned by their drives, and so
Absolutely.
yeah. And so each drive has its own sort of say. Like he conceives of the human being as a collection of drives, like as a sort of a social structure. Like you can think of it as like a community, and there are drives competing for mastery within that community.
Mm.
And depending on that rank ordering, that order of rank of drives, a person will be such and such a type of person. And a person will philosophize in a certain manner depending on which drives are highest in him. So if a person has a temperament as like a conqueror, someone who's lusting to rule, well, he'll philosophize in a certain manner. It's not like each philosopher has like an unfiltered access to a truth. It's more that every drives within him, that the strongest drives within him are having their say.
Can I provide a
Yeah, and that's
contemporary
part of
example of this, perchance?
the pathos of distance too. Anyways, sorry.
Would you say?
The contemporary example. Am I cutting out?
No, I can hear you.
Oh, a contemporary example embodying this almost one to one is the lifespan hacker guy Brian Johnson. He talks about his psychology specifically going into just disciplining his life to make himself live longer. And he literally says, like, there's a different Brian for parts of the day or based on what I'm craving. And he says he even talks to himself internally, like saying, okay, work time, Brian. This is sleeping time, Brian. I'm now taking over. So it's kind of like personifying the various drives that make up a single person, and he's like quantifying that and then organizing that specifically to get to his objectives outside of his body.
Okay, but I don't
Yes.
think Nietzsche believes in that at all, because that's one of the
No,
things.
not like literally talking to yourself like as if like you're a crazy person, but it's like he's like personifying that we're all made up of different drives based on different urges, different emotions, different times of day, different eras of our lives, and every person. This is kind of a mystery to a lot of us, but we're the end result projecting outwards of many, many competing drives, like Nietzsche is saying.
Yeah, I think it's
I really
relevant.
like that.
I think it's relevant what Ozzy's saying. It's because ultimately the point is that there is no one person. Like our experience of ourselves, of course, is of one continuous person. But for Nietzsche, that's not it. It's like we're a multiplicity of drives, and at different points in our lives, even at different points of the day, like we have
Yeah.
different temperaments. Like at
There is
least
no
provision.
more dangerous error than to confound the effect with the cause. I call this error the intrinsic perversion of reason, and that's just what I think is going on here.
Hmm.
And that's what Nietzsche talks about in the four great errors: the confusion of cause and effect.
Can you relate it a little bit more? Like, how do
So
you?
he talks about how the famous Cornaro writes the book about his diet and how it's the cause of his long life.
Yeah, man.
And
That's
Nietzsche's like, yeah, no, that's not the cause of your long life. The cause of your long life is actually the slowness of the molecular change. Your diet just fit the
Mhm.
level
Oh
of
no, I'm not
molecular
saying that at all.
change.
I'm saying I would
He's
say
just.
Brian's psychology is like acknowledging this to be like a reality of how he internally
Yeah.
operates, and he's like quantifying, like organize a library based on like sections and stuff. He's like approaching the many drives of his internal psychology and kind of trying to organize it to better suit the
Yeah, but he's
continual
like,
single
oh, this
person
is
that he
going to
is on the
cause my
outside.
long life, is doing all
I
these
mean
things.
that. Yeah, but
No, dude.
That's the confusion of
Viserys, you've
cause and effect.
misunderstood him. You've misunderstood him. He's just giving an example of a person who's acknowledging that a person is made up of different drive. I don't think Ozzy is.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
you're right.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I guess, yeah,
Yeah. So I think it's
no,
an interesting
you're
example of
absolutely
someone.
right. You're absolutely right. My fault. I see where I was getting hung up on the
So
example.
it's more like I think it's a great example
Yeah, no, my
of
fault, my fault.
searching and almost rediscovering a Nietzschean concept independently and then working with it. And his concept is like this is my main objective as a single person. I need to like organize my internal competing drives to kind of align the best I can towards the single goal. I think it's a good cool rediscovery of this, which I think can manifest in various ways going in the future. Like I want to be the best athlete, best artist, the best this and that. People might attempt to do this. They might try to like organize their internal selves. Who knows?
but to Crocs's point, what he mentioned was like even those drives keep changing. It's almost like Heraclitus is saying of like they are not standing still. Like your hunger drive is
Absolutely,
not the same every
absolutely.
time. It's just so even giving it a name is not really getting any closer to the truth because they vary.
Because every drive
Yeah.
practices for mastery or whatever he says at some
Yes,
point.
yes,
Yeah,
and they're all different moment to moment, not
absolutely.
staying stagnant. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. And then at the end of that aphorism, he's talking about how we may we have a bit of a misinterpretation of our drives. Like the scholar who believes that he's pursuing truth, like unadulterated, like he's really interested in pursuing the facts, but his real interests, I'll just quote him. He says, the real quote unquote interest of the scholar, therefore, lie usually somewhere else, say in his family or in making money or in politics. So your motive, your conscious motive, is not really the same as what you're actually working towards.
Yeah.
Uh, that's a cool. I'm not going to comment too long, but I think it's cool to kind of see how Nietzsche therefore branches off into Freud and Carl Jung from this kind of talking point, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, he
Yeah, I mean,
definitely
they probably
prefigured a lot
appropriated
of it.
quite a bit from Nietzsche, you know what I mean? So
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. All right. Well, I guess we can move on to the next one. We're moving very slow. Yeah, but that's good. That's good though. We'll probably have to do like another meeting
We
to
might-
even finish the first
we
chapter.
definitely have
That's
to, because
fine. I
Yeah.
mean, we're
I
we're we're
agree.
just we're building the steam of how
Yeah,
it should go. Basically, it's got to
Honestly,
absolutely.
knock the rust
I,
off.
I also think it's very important to get these kind of foundational ideas down, because when
Mm,
you get into like much deeper topics, we don't want to keep coming back because people didn't understand these concepts, so
For sure, for sure.
yeah.
take your time, understand it, do it thoroughly, so that there's less confusion, less argument, and all this stuff in the future.
Yeah, perfect practice makes perfect, not just
Yeah.
Mm.
lazy practice.
Yeah.
Actually, I didn't write anything for Aphorisms 7 and 8. I find them completely uninteresting. I don't know if someone wants to say something about it, but I don't have anything
Let
to
me
say
see what
about
I
them.
let me see what I if I have anything on there.
Yeah,
I didn't
I,
actually write anything at all
No, I
either.
mean just 7. He's just calling philosophers actors of their own ideals, basically.
All right.
That's it.
Uh,
I did
Yeah.
That
have a
relates back to
question.
what we had before in 6 and 5, basically.
all right.
I
So
did have a question about number
Oh, yeah,
7.
go ahead.
sure.
I did have a sorry. I did have a question about number 7. There
Go
are
ahead.
there are times in Nietzsche, if I remember, where the sort of the doctrine of the Epicureans, he is well uh, as sort of he's sympathetic to it, to Lucretius in particular. I don't know if you know what the Catherine Project is, but I was going to I uh, spot the Lucretius thing there some time ago, really because to understand what Nietzsche was found so interesting in Lucretius. And so I was a little bit surprised by this aphorism that he seems to take Epicurus um, uh, really as sort of a person who resents the success of Plato and tries to outdo him on a in some kind of backhanded way. Anyhow, it surprised me, this one.
Okay.
Actually, likewise for I know a lot of people have made a lot of Aphorism 9. It's another one that I don't personally have much to say about, so I don't know. You guys can go ahead.
It's kind of I guess we kind of referenced it before, how like Stoics, uh they're being indifferent in nature, and claim that they basically they see their own tyrannical drive in nature, and that they're not necessarily living according to nature. And Nietzsche argues that how do you every type of living is kind of according to nature, I guess, because it's just how do you not live um, in a way that is not nature.
Yeah, and the only I highlight a lot in my books. The only part I've highlighted in here is um, the last paragraph. He writes, "What formerly happened with the Stoics still happens today too. As soon as any philosophy begins to believe in itself, it always creates the world in its own image. It cannot do otherwise.
Mhm.
Philosophy is this tyrannical drive itself, the most spiritual will to power, to the creation of the world, to the causa prima." So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's a
And that,
creation of the world.
yeah, that is basically philosophy. Is different. Different philosophies are different world perspectives, I guess, and creation of worlds.
Yeah,
I
it's
was,
very much what he's doing himself with concepts like the will to power.
Yeah,
It's an interpretation of the natural world.
yeah.
It's kind of, I'm not going to linger too much on this topic, but I think it's kind of cool. In Warhammer 40K, one of the lores of the races being the orcs is that if enough of them believe in something, it becomes true, like literally. So they're kind of like dumb and brutish. They think that rockets that are painted red will fly faster, so they do. And I think that is true for reality, unironically, in terms of what you're saying. When a concept believes in itself enough, it kind of makes the world to be in its image.
Okay. If you're done with that, we'll move over to aphorism 10.
I was gonna say one thing about the nature thing.
Okay.
I'm not too familiar with like that Stoic idea of living according to nature, but people still talk like that in some ways, like live naturally.
Mm,
And to me, that could be interpreted as saying something like live according to the way that our bodies are naturally designed, like the way that we sort of evolved to live in a way. And like there are some pros and cons to that. Like you can recognize there are some things we do that aren't quote unquote natural because they're not what our bodies are, designed for. But it's just kind of murky. Like some things aren't natural, but they're better, right? Like some of our diets might not have been something we evolved to eat like over the course of evolution, but they can
mm.
still be better for us. And then there are other things we do that are unnatural and unhealthy because that we didn't really evolve for it. So I'm not saying the Stoics were saying that, and that's what Nietzsche was responding to, but that's something that I kind of think of when people talk about living according to nature. Like it's like harnessing what we have, like what we've been given, and sort of optimizing our life around that.
But I guess Nietzsche's point here is that how do you not live according to nature? Because it's that is your life. Everything you do is natural, right? Everything you do is your nature, in your nature. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. It's not possible to do an action that is not in your nature. That doesn't it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Like
That's
when
why I think Nietzsche could have been sort of straw manning or misinterpreting, because if that's really what they meant, then they wouldn't really say it. Because if they had acknowledged that, then they wouldn't have said it. So that phrase must mean something else. It must mean they're saying there's a healthy way to live, and we're going to call that the natural way to live. And then there's like an unhealthy or a worse way to live, and to them that would be unnatural. So they're obviously not saying like um, live according to like the world as a whole or live according to the way that you are, because that would just be redundant. So I think Nietzsche, like it's a cool passage. I think it's pretty like I've always liked this passage, but I think he could be overreaching a bit, and it's like you're taking something literal that maybe wasn't meant to be literal. But
I think
like I said, I don't really know because I'm not familiar with the Stoics as much as I could be.
and Nietzsche argues in different ways about this as well. Like there are he talks about how like people who kind of put the past on a pedestal being like, oh, this the past was much better. It's almost like the crab walking backwards, of like, oh, we should go back, and what was past, whatever we're leaving behind is better than where we're headed. That idea is also not really life affirming. It's just it's kind of an idealism, but of the past, of being like it was better back in the day. We ought to live that way because that was better than the present. It's just that's also like it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, that's why I
It's
said
not a
there's
straight.
pros and cons to that way of thinking. Like in some ways it can be productive, in other ways you are kind of going backwards. Like we do have to evolve in some ways, but it's still like there's still some substance to this idea that in a way there's a natural constitution of our bodies, and like the way like we're social creatures, right? So it would be unnatural to be isolated your whole life and not to talk to someone, right? It would
Sure.
be more quote unquote natural to have relationships. So in a way that could be considered living naturally. And I mean it's useful to recognize that. And obviously you don't want to go too extreme. Like you don't want to just go back to living how we were 200,000 years ago or whatever. So it's like, yeah, you can't be too extreme with it, but I just think that idea of living naturally has some usefulness to it. And yeah, I just wonder if like Nietzsche was kind of dismissing that
Overreaching.
entirely or something.
Like living according, I mean, learning from your past mistakes and learning from, not everything that we left behind is bad, right? Nietzsche even talks about how everything is not like mankind is not really evolving in a progression sort of way. And science supports the same idea of like we aren't really becoming more and more complex or anything like that. It's just there are different paths that we take, and some things that we left behind are better than what we have now. So it's not necessarily saying that we shouldn't learn from the past.
So, what you were saying earlier, well, I guess just now, Stark, about the past, sort of transitions us very perfectly to the aphorism number 10, because he does mention the act of trying to return to a past standard of value. So here he describes two types. So in the first in the first paragraph, he describes the case of a rare type, like a scholar who has a true will to truth, who, the type of scholar who would prefer a certain something to a series of uncertain, uncertain nothings, or sorry, a certain nothing over uncertain somethings. But as he says, he writes, but this is nihilism and the sign of a despairing, mortally weary soul. So the sort of person who doesn't want to buy into anything unless he himself feels that he's attained some sort of real, absolutely true standard of truth. So he doesn't go for that. He sees that as quite nihilistic. And then in the second paragraph, he details stronger and livelier thinkers who are still eager for life. And these types, they side against appearance and they side against appearance, and they're the types who, I guess, more of the idealistic types who want to find secure possessions. He writes something of the ancient domain of the faith of former times, perhaps the immortal soul, the old gods. So, yeah, someone who would like to return to a standard of mysticism, a type of Plato with the ideas of the forms, those sorts of things. But he doesn't agree with either of these types. He agrees more with a type of today who's, for him, more authentically truthful. He speaks of he writes, quote, "In this, it seems to me we should agree with these skeptical anti-realists and knowledge microscopists of today. Their instincts, which repels them from modern reality, is unrefuted." Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, he writes, "The main thing about them is not that they wish to go back, but that they wish to get away. A little more strength, flight, courage, and artistic power, and they would want to rise, not return." So he speaks of his contemporary skeptical anti-realists, and if they were a little bit stronger, they wouldn't stop at their skepticism and the anti-realism. They would, if they were a little bit stronger and a little more artistic, they would rise towards, what Nietzsche does, which is more of the creation of an artistic interpretation of reality. So yeah, I like that. It's very cool.
Maybe we'll, depending on how people are feeling, we'll do a couple more aphorisms.
Actually, I have to go after this one. So, well, you guys can continue definitely, but I have to go. I have to make dinner, and I'm working tomorrow.
Okay. So do you want to do one more and then call it for today?
Sure. We can do aphorism 11.
All right. Everybody okay with that? Assume?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
I had to step out for a moment. Sorry about that. But
That's all
No
good.
problem.
you guys discussed it well enough.
Yes.
This has been very enjoyable thus far. This is an upgrade from the previous discussions. I like this approach a lot better.
Yeah. We get less in the weeds, so I like that too. That's always what I've wanted.
All right. So with aphorism 11, yeah, he talks a little bit about a priorize.
Yeah, synthetic judgments. Yeah. Man, it's a long aphorism. But
I mean, we can put it off for the next time or whatever.
yeah, I'd rather do that actually. Yeah, it's a long one, so
okay.
that next
There's
time.
a lot of weeds to root out in this one.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Sounds good. So we'll pause here, and I guess we'll pick a date for
Yeah.
when we can join in and continue from here.